Well, we continue our debate. You know, usually we end up with these things saying, geez, I wish we had some more time. Well, guess what? We got another 30 minutes. So we're going to continue our conversation with Ian Donis from Public Radio.
Critics say Rhode Island is held back by the know-a-guy mentality or know-a-guy culture of Rhode Island. Mr. Taveras, let's start with you. Without respect to the jobs or the economy, what would you do to try and make Rhode Island a ethically cleaner place?
Well, I think one of the things that we have to do is make sure that we have a lot of sunshine. I believe in Justice Brandeis, and that is that sunshine is the best disinfectant. So that's important for us. We need to make sure that the...
In a practical way, what would that mean? What would you change? How would you make government more transparent in a way that it is not right now?
I'll give you one example. In the city of Providence, and you've covered it in the past, other people have covered it, we didn't have a lot of information online. We now have a data portal, and we're constantly adding things to it. But I think it's important that people at home, people who are listening on a computer, can go on and find information. So I think data
should your email
important.
Correspondence and those of your predecessors as mayor be public? Should the emails that you and your predecessors as mayor have sent, should that be publicly accessible?
I think that emails for the most part are. I think there are some exceptions according to the open access to the Open Records Act.
Public Records Act.
But I think emails and other things generally should be. Second thing I would do is I think we need to restore Ethics Commission oversight with the General Assembly. I think that's important, and that sends an important message to everyone. And when we find wrongdoing, we need to hold people accountable. That's important as well, and I think that you, Parker, other folks are focused on making sure that when information is out there, that it's brought to the light of day, and we need, as elected officials, to make sure people are held accountable.
Mr. Raimondo, what would you do to promote a cleaner and more transparent form of government in Rhode Island?
Well, we have a culture, as long as we have a culture that favors insiders, that holds Rhode Island back. Everyone needs to be treated the same. And that means even if you're a Major League Baseball player or if you're related to a politician, same rules, you have to follow the same rules. I believe in increased transparency. Under my tenure, we've put more information online than any treasurer before me. We instituted an investor relations portal. We substantially increased the disclosures around our bond agreements. You have to put as much information out to the public as possible. We need more transparency in the legislative process. When we did pension reform, everything was in public. There were no midnight hearings. Things didn't happen at midnight for the next day. We need to change the way the legislature runs. All these hearings should be in public and posted a couple days in advance, and those rules shouldn't be suspended. The public deserves the right to know.
Let me stop you there. Speaking of the legislature, Mayor Taveras referred to the Ethics Commission. The State Senate has been the main stumbling block to restoring the Ethics Commission's oversight of the General Assembly. What would you do if elected governor to overcome that obstacle?
I do agree that the Ethics Commission should have more and greater oversight over the General Assembly, and as governor I will lead to make that happen.
Mr. Pell, what would your approach be to instilling a cleaner, a more ethical form of government in Rhode Island?
Well, first of all, I'm proud to be the only candidate who's put forward a comprehensive government integrity plan. It includes making sure that our state employees go through a comprehensive ethics training. It also includes signing an executive order, my very first day in office, dealing with special interest money in politics, because it's a real problem. And it's one of the reasons why I've taken that problem head on in my own campaign by not taking money from PACs or state lobbyists. But let me also just mention that it's interesting to hear the treasurer talk about transparency, given all the challenges that we've seen around transparency for what hedge fund managers are making in state investments. I think what we need is a real fundamental approach and commitment to transparency and to bringing in new ideas and new perspectives into government. This is about making government accessible to people. And the truth is that people don't feel like they're heard, listened to. People feel like the State House is very closed off. And one of the biggest things that the governor can do, and I think a new governor can do, is really be accessible and be open and be there when people have questions so anyone can call up and the governor's office can be a point of open access to the state.
Mr. Giroux, what would your approach be for having a more ethically clean government in Rhode Island?
I've talked for quite some time now about establishing the first Office of Inspector General to be our first line of defense on waste, fraud, and abuse.
Let me just stop you there for a second, because there's been an Inspector General bill introduced by Larry Valencia, a state rep in the Rhode Island House. That hasn't gone anywhere because the legislative leadership hasn't supported it. Why would you be more successful than Rep Valencia in moving that forward?
Well, I think we can kick off the position within the governor's office or within the lieutenant governor's office. I think we can find the money in those attorneys' budgets to kick off the first position of this Office of Inspector General. And, you know, there's a lot of research that comes across one's desk in the course of an election. And, you know, one sense you could say all roads lead to Bain Capital. And you know, there's been a lot of there should be much more oversight in the Ethics Commission, and you know, so who's received free shares of, you know, Rhode Island paid millions for their investments. Treasurer Raimondo established a blind trust, for example, to keep earned shares and investment funds, you know, private and aside. And so there should be much more oversight and openness in state government. We need to close that door of corruption and inside cronyism. And I'll lead that challenge for the state.
Before we let Parker ask the next question, let me ask all of you, do you think that this idea that if you don't know somebody, there's no point in trying to work a deal in Rhode Island contributes to the dearth of development proposals on the 195 land, Mr. Pell?
Absolutely it does. The culture of cronyism, of pay to play, really has held our state back for a generation. Held it back because people have lost faith and confidence in our state government, and they think that you do have to know someone.
Well, people from out of state. Do you think that that's kept some people from out of state in bidding on the 195 land?
I do. I mean, what you hear from developers is the commercial property taxes are a clear deterrent. As you know, commercial property tax burden in the city of Providence is the 4th highest in the country. But as I said, a culture that favors insiders holds us back. Developers have an opportunity. They could go to Massachusetts, New York, they can go other places, and if they think they're not going to get a fair deal here, yes, it's a deterrent.
You think that's what's happening here, Mayor?
Well, let me be clear. I do think that it can be and it is a deterrent. We need to make sure that we have a transparent government, and as mayor of the city of Providence, I've worked hard to make that happen. But let me just point out again on commercial property taxes, where do you think that commercial property taxes would be if we had gone into bankruptcy? I don't know of any case that a city goes into bankruptcy and taxes are lower as a result. So we have worked hard to hold the line on taxes and at the same time to have more private development in our city.
Right, but you've told us that. What about the idea that people from out of state look at Rhode Island like hands off, I'm not connected?
No, I think that it's a problem. I think any time you have public corruption is a problem. So when we have negative publicity in our state, I think it's a problem. We're in the New York Times because of issues with elected officials. That's a big problem for us. We want people to know that we are an innovative, creative state with great food, great resources, great government. We don't want people to start thinking of Rhode Island as a place where there's a lot of corruption, and it does hurt us. Mr.
Giroux, quickly.
It's regulation. The standout example to me is the billion-dollar developer that wanted to do the project on the old American Tourister plant. They'll never invest here again. They spent millions of dollars through red tape and fees and attorneys challenging their plans, finally get approval. They just gave up. They said, we're never coming to Rhode Island again.
All right, Parker has a question for you all.
In the aftermath of 38 Studios, there's a real fatigue out there, really a fear of taxpayer-backed loans, tax credits, any public subsidies for private businesses. As we know, these deals are propositioned all the time. We've seen it in downtown Providence with the Superman building. What are the lessons that we've learned from 38 Studios? Mayor Taveras.
Well, I think one of the things that we learned is that we need to make sure to look at everything in a diverse way. I mean, we put all our eggs in one basket with 38 Studios. It was a sweetheart deal for a retired baseball player. I'm a Red Sox fan as well, but I'm not that big of a Red Sox fan. And we need to really focus on, I often say this, and I've heard other people say it, would we be better off now if we had taken $75 million and picked 75 Rhode Island businesses 75 Rhode Island businesses and giving them each a $1 million loan guarantee. Of course we'd be better off today. There's no doubt that we'd be better off today. But we were also always looking for a headline, a quick fix, a silver bullet that's going to turn our economy around. Someone's going to come in from the outside and fix Rhode Island. No, it's Rhode Islanders. Rhode Islanders are the ones who are going to fix Rhode Island. We should be investing here at home. We should help the businesses that are here grow. There are a lot of people who are listening tonight that could have used help instead of 38 studios.
Treasurer, we're mired in this lawsuit now. What have we learned?
The idea of providing capital to businesses in Rhode Island, I think, is a good idea. You know, that's a sound idea. And I agree with the mayor that if we had spread that money across dozens of small companies in Rhode Island, that we would have flourished. The biggest mistake there was we fell in love with a sports star, and there were no checks and balances in the process to allow us to make sure that we wouldn't spend so much of the taxpayers' money into one particular deal. That's what I was saying earlier. Everyone should get the same treatment. I don't think anyone thinks that he would have gotten that money if he weren't, you know, a famous baseball player. So the greatest lesson there is, you know, diversification. You can't, everyone knows, like, you can't, if I was in the investment business, we would invest in dozens of companies because startup companies sometimes don't work. So you have to invest across the spectrum and invest in our strengths. You know, Rhode Island has real strengths. Marine technology, ocean science, food science, medical technology. We can't be investing in everything. We need to invest in our strengths.
Mr. Pell?
I think there are a couple of key lessons. The first is that we have to learn what went wrong. And as you mentioned, we're mired in a lawsuit right now. So making sure that we get all the details so we can understand what went wrong and prevent it. And so that it's very important that people participate in that process. And as you know, the treasurer has delayed actually her deposition until after the election. The second thing is to invest in a real strategy for economic growth in this state. Not a one-off approach like 38 studios, but really going to our core of what we're good at. Our maritime economy is what I've proposed. Our higher educational system, our knowledge economy, our healthcare system, and of course, our creative economy, which can be such a hybrid and so vibrant in this state. So having a comprehensive economic development strategy coupled with understanding what, and making sure that we never have what occurred happen again.
Mr. Giroux, a big debate in the fallout and the aftermath of the 38 studios, moral obligation bonds, and whether or not we should pay them. Of course, the General Assembly made that commitment to pay them. Should the state deal with moral obligation bonds in the future?
No. So there's statements that make headlines, there's statements of facts, and I believe that we took the proper course in paying the 38 studios bonds because it put us in better standing to now collect on the insurance claims that we're now receiving. So sometimes you have to pay the bill and be current to keep your best standing. I do believe in providing tens of thousands of local investments, and we can do that by, as I mentioned, a statewide revolving fund, utilizing the Treasury revolving fund. Those homeowner loans are accountability. They're not handouts. It's a jobs plan that's not on the back of taxpayers. And I proposed a different way of funding the Commerce Fund, you know, saying, listen, if we get some of this money from the repaid TARP funds, we can establish our Commerce Fund and keep that 2% overhead for ourselves rather than paying it out. But leadership can deliver a statewide micro investment plan for the property owners of the state.
So let's get the rest of you on the record regarding moral obligation bonds. Do you think that's something the state should engage in, Mr. Pell?
Not without extreme caution. I think that I cannot envision a circumstance where it would be appropriate to do again.
Ms. Raimondo, it's an effective way to raise money.
I think it can be. I think it can be, but you have to, you know, do it appropriately and have all the necessary disclosures. So yes, I wouldn't throw the baby out with the bathwater, even though this one was a disaster.
How about you, Mayor Taveras?
No, I don't think we should use moral obligation bonds. I think that the people should have a say in determining whether or not we're going to do it. This moral obligation bonds, which is simply an end round around voter approval, and we just saw what happened with it. So no, I don't support it.
All right, we're going to go back to one of my favorite questions from the town meeting. This is from a very colorful businessman, you know, Carl Wadenston from Vibeco. He was quite restrained in the meeting. There's nothing outrageous here. But he says the most important accomplishment that the next governor could bring is to change the culture of the state. Let's hear what he says.
We don't accept that there isn't a better way to do this. We want to be a curious state, that we can ask questions of the people that lead us and show them better ways, and be a low-cost state in services that we provide, and then dollars come back to the state. So if they could change the culture, they don't need to do anything else in the state.
So this really ends up being a question about leadership, because it's a big picture question, and it's certainly something that's not, statutorily given to the governor. But Mr. Pell, how would you go about turning the state around?
Well, it's a core question, and you start by electing a new governor who has a fresh perspective, who has new ideas on our long-standing challenges and a different approach to how to overcome them. That is what I think I'm offering voters in this election, a real choice that is different, someone who's put forward ideas like the HOPE internship program so that every public high school student can get a career training internship in high school, making sure that we have HOPE scholarships so that people can go to college without these huge levels of debt. But across the board, what we need is that kind of fresh perspective and new idea. And that comes with changing the culture of politics we have had, the culture of pay-to-play and cronyism that has held us back for so long. And that is why I've refused to take any money from political action committees and state lobbyists, because I think it's wrong to take money from people who are paid to influence the decisions you make as governor. And that itself is a huge change that we can make to the culture of our politics.
So how do you lead? What characteristics will you bring to the office that will enable you to turn around the legislature, to turn around the population, to turn around the malaise that's just sitting on the state?
Well, I will bring the leadership that I learned in the military, the leadership that I learned in the Coast Guard of honor, service, and actually standing up and moving forward when you have a plan. Here's what we need. We need new ideas and a fresh perspective, and having a new, energetic governor with new ideas who's willing to think differently, who's not beholden to these old groups, but instead is going to look beyond in a more strategic and comprehensive way, making sure that we take advantage of opportunities available through the federal government and my service in the federal government, making sure that we are connecting ourselves to the global economy too. You see, Rhode Island once grew because we were at the intersection of the movement of goods, of people, and of ideas, because of our unique geographic location. That's going to be how we're going to grow again. And that's why I've said we have to invest in our roads and our bridges, but also our ports. And I'm going to create a port authority, which is something that Commerce RI already has the statutory authority to do, but no governor has done. Leadership is about taking that idea and then making it happen.
Mr. Giroux, how can you be the leader that turns the state into a place that is seen as energetic and attracts business?
Thank you, Bill. I've been steadfast for a number of years in my passion for jobs in Rhode Island, for a real Rhode Island recovery. And I'm serious, when I say this is going to be a long winter trying to figure out who's going to provide help to tens of thousands of Rhode Islanders by next spring. It has to happen. When I hear Clay explain there needs to be a new fresh face with new ideas, I think that's me. That's me all day long, and it has been for a number of years. I talk about a statewide jobs plan that resembles the old-fashioned WPA and the work programs of the 70s CETA. People I meet every single day are encouraged by my vibrancy, and that is, and I get the respect of legislators and folks in the media and audiences every day, because I take this challenge on and say, I'm going to make sure they remember me and my good ideas, because that's the most important thing, is to propel good ideas into the future, and that's what I'm here to do.
So, Mayor Taveras, what are the characteristics? What can you bring to the office that makes you the guy who transforms Rhode Island?
Bill, the first day that I was in office in January 3rd, 2011, I met with all the directors in the city of Providence, and I said something to them that I will repeat to my directors at the state level, and that is that the right answer is never, that's the way it's always been done. That's part of our challenge right there. We need to change that mentality that, well, it's always been done a certain way, so therefore you do it that way. That's never the right answer. So you have to create that culture, and that starts with the people you appoint. One of the things that I did in the city of Providence was I appointed the public safety commissioner, Steve Perry, who was a former colonel of the state police. And that was important to me because I knew some of the challenges in the past that had existed in the police department. Made sure that all the promotions were done by test and by the recommendation of the public safety commissioner and the chief. Because again, understanding the history that existed there. Asked our command staff not to attend political functions because I understood the message that sent. So try to lead by, what I would try to do is lead by example, set the tone at the top, appoint good people who have integrity and understand that we need to be smarter about how we govern. We need to be smarter about the investments we make. We need to be smarter about how we run our departments.
Ms. Raimondo, the people are thirsty for leadership. What can you bring them?
I can bring them experience creating jobs. I've done that. I spent over 10 years working with dozens of companies, building them, one employee at the time from the ground up. Rhode Island needs a jobs governor right now, and I have the skills and experience to be that jobs governor. But I've also shown I'm not afraid to take on the tough issues. Rhode Island needs a leader who's going to challenge the status quo, who's going to challenge special interests, who's going to take on the tough issues and solve problems for the long term with the General Assembly. But to the question of how do you change culture and how do you get people to believe again in government, you have to make government work. Government has to work. You know, when I took office, I inherited a crime victims compensation program. I took office in January of 2011. There were claims that hadn't been processed as far back as 2009. There was a 900 claim backlog. So we changed things. We used the computer. We didn't have everything be paper-based. I changed some of the faces. And within less than a year, we got that backlog from 900 to 0. We processed every claim within a week, and we expanded the program to help victims of domestic violence. That's how you get people to believe again. You show them that government works and can solve big problems.
All right, we're going to Ian.
Let's start with Mr. Giroux. Rhode Island cities and towns face billions of dollars in unfunded obligations for retiree health care. How would you cut those costs down if you were elected governor?
So, Ian, Rhode Island is in a crisis in the way you described. And that's why I look towards the 2008 Emergency Economic Stabilization Act. It was passed by Congress when the stock markets were at 6,800 points in 2009. We've now grown to 17,000 points in our stock market. That's 10,000 points in just 4 years that has been gained, where previously it had taken 60 years for the stock market to climb 10,000 points. Insecurity over investments is on the tip of the tongue for every investment advisor in the country. And I do believe that it's a scare tactic. I believe that we can look to this extraordinary provision in the Economic Stabilization Act. Rhode Island deserves our fair share of pension insurance. $1.2 billion replacement for any loss before 2010. That's $1.2 billion back into the state pension fund. And from there, we have trust funds of investment for health care, for infrastructure, pulling these funds into a statewide provision where we can handle them professionally, not leaving every small town to fight that battle. And that's what we're going to do through leadership, and we can seek these federal funds and extraordinary measures provided in the Economic Stabilization Act. It's law until 2018. It was a 10-year plan.
Let me stop you there, Mr. Giroux. I think
it was a 10-year plan for the economy, not just a 2-year bailout plan for the bank. It's law until 2018.
Let's go to
Thank you.
Mr. Pell. How would you cut down these billions of dollars in unfunded obligations for Rhode Island's municipalities?
Well, first of all, I will stand with our cities and towns. Our cities and towns in general have taken an enormous hit, some 70% in the non-educational aid between 2008 and 2012. So it is critically important that the governor stand with cities and towns. Now, the pension issue for cities and towns is also an enormous part of the burden. And
okay. I'm not really hearing an answer to the question about the health care obligations, though.
Well, the health care obligations in general, as we know, we've been able to make enormous progress in healthcare generally in this state through HealthSource RI. As to the specific pension obligations,
Would you support moving the retirees, municipal retirees, into HealthSource Rhode Island as a way of trying to reduce these costs?
no. I think what we need to do is actually sit down with cities and towns and sit down with the people who are affected by these decisions. That is something that did not really happen in a meaningful way in the overall pension issue over the last few years. And it's why this issue has continued to drag on and drag on and drag on. What we need is a governor who actually will listen and sit down, not a governor who will insist to everyone the way it has to be, but actually listen, come up with a plan, and then move the plan forward. That gets right to Bill's question about leadership. Leadership is about recognizing that you represent, as governor, all of our cities and towns. You represent all of our people, and you have to work with them if you're going to make progress, not dictate to them how things have to be.
Let's go to Ms. Raimondo. You led the charge on the pension overhaul. You've probably given some consideration to the health care obligations. What are your thoughts? What specifically could be done to reduce those obligations?
Well, first we have to be honest about the magnitude of the problem. We can't try to pretend it's smaller than it is. You know, we have to get the facts and do the math and see how big the problem is. The first thing I would do as governor is provide some technical assistance to cities and towns. These are really complicated issues. I learned that doing the pension. Most cities and towns, they just don't have the staff to be able to do the technical work. So we need to help them to be able to do that. So we get an accurate assessment of how big the problem is. And then secondly, we need to give them incentive to make the difficult choices. If you don't make tough choices, more people are going to get hurt.
Would you support moving municipal retirees into HealthSource Rhode Island?
I'm not clear how that would reduce cost.
How about if you put them in Medicare?
I think that's an idea worth considering. That is an idea worth considering. But, you know, everyone deserves access to high quality health care. And so we need to provide the health care, and we need to find a way to do that. And what I started to say was I would link state aid to providing an incentive for cities and towns. Cities and towns do some of the fundamental restructuring. They should get more state aid in combination with that, you know, making those tough decisions.
Mr. Taveras, Providence is the state's largest community, has significant unfunded healthcare obligations. What would your approach be to cutting those costs down for Rhode Island cities and towns?
Well, first of all, I think we need to recognize your question asked about cutting. I think we should recognize that we have a commitment that we need to try to fulfill. And what we've done in Providence, and Bill, you mentioned it, moving retirees to Medicare has actually helped us immensely. Over the last 2 years, I believe, we've cut our costs in terms of retiree health care by about 25%. And we can get those exact figures to you, but I can tell you that's as a result of us sitting down and negotiating and trying to find a way to address this issue in a comprehensive manner. So moving to Medicare is certainly one thing that we should be doing across the state. In terms of HealthSource Rhode Island, the issue is, Ian, that most cities and towns are self-insured, and therefore you know, there's not really necessarily a savings by going to HealthSource Rhode Island. Would I be open to it if people could show me an actual savings and that it would be a benefit to our cities and towns? So certainly we should look at all options.
I will, Mr. Giroux, you can have 30 seconds on this, and we're going to the next question.
Thank you. The retirees in question that you're talking about, they used to be able to sit down one-on-one with a retirement counselor and really understand all the benefits that they had. Now they have to sit in a group setting, and the counselors aren't really prepared to sit down with them one-on-one. That's how confusing the issue is. To answer the question of how are we going to fund this health care benefit, I'd say the majority of these retirees now have a 401k that's been privatized. And I would say, you know, by rule, let them access their 401k to offset, help pay for their Medicare without penalty, without state tax penalty. That's the first thing we can do to help these retirees meet their health benefit need.
Okay, since we're online, we're not on TV anymore, we told you we'd only got another half hour. We're going to keep you here until one of you drops. No, we just got a couple more minutes, so Parker's going to ask a question, and you can't take too long to answer it, right? Like 45 seconds a minute.
It's a bit of a light question as we're kind of winding things down here, but important nonetheless for someone who wants to be the state's chief executive. When you have an important decision to make, how do you make it? Mayor Taveras.
Well, let me tell you, having learned as mayor, having to make a lot of difficult decisions, you try to get all the information that you can. Try to make sure that you ask good questions. You encourage your advisors to be transparent with you, to be honest with you. You encourage them to be willing to disagree with you. Because one of the most dangerous things that you can have is a room where everyone agrees. And you try to think through all of the consequences. And I've learned the hard way with respect to that. But it also, I think, will help prepare, it has helped prepare me to be the next governor of the state of Rhode Island. But you try to get the best people around you, make sure to have diverse information, ask good questions, and promote real discussion.
Treasurer?
The key to being a successful leader is to surround yourself with great people. You know, you're only as good as the team you put around you. And so the first thing I will do is make sure that I have a team around me which is diverse and smart and experienced to be able to consult them. The other thing is you have to think about the consequences of your actions and make sure you talk to and solicit feedback from every group that you're going to be affecting. But probably the greatest lesson I've learned as treasurer, and I said this many times, you know, behind every number or behind every decision is a person. So take the time to spend with the people whose lives you're impacting by your decision, and that hopefully will result in a better decision.
Mr. Pell, when you've got to make that tough call, what do you do?
Well, I had the opportunity, the honor to work in the White House Situation Room at a time of increasing challenge around the world. And the way you do it, and the way I did it, was to bring departments and agencies together, to listen, to make sure we understood every single implication of what was going to happen, to make sure that we were making a decision that was good both in the short term, but also in the long term. And so often that has been the strategic approach that we've missed. But there's also a really important component, and that's listening to the people who are affected by the decision that you are making. And if pension issues would have come before me, I would have actually listened to all the people who were affected by that decision, so that we would have come up with something that wouldn't have impacted them in such a negative way.
Mr. Giroux?
I'd say based on my experience with projects and campaigns and people and friends and tough decisions in life, I'd say when you surround yourself by people who believe in you and what you're doing, that makes the job that much easier. Of course, it always involves bringing constituents together and listening and understanding the consequences, but that team that's closest to you, when they believe in you, that makes the job that much easier, and that's how it gets done.
Well, you know, I'd like to keep you here the rest of the night, but Johnson & Wales probably needs their hall back. I want to thank everybody who wants to applaud for these folks who have been up here. Great discussion. Don't forget to vote on Tuesday. Thank you very much.